we want to start talking about 15th century artists with Gentile da Fabriano. We don't know his exact birth date. You'll find this is fairly frequent. He died in 1427. And the work we're going to look at is known as the Strozzi altarpiece, or the Adoration of the Magi, which is the main subject, as you can see. It was made for the sacristy, an altar in the sacristy of the Church of Santa Trinita. And the patron was Palla, P-A-L-L-A, Strozzi. At this time, the Strozzi were the wealthiest family in Florence. And as you can see, it's a very elaborate altarpiece with gilded pinnacles. It was created in 1423. And of course, the main subject is the Adoration of the Magi. And then in the predella, you have 3 scenes from the infancy of Christ: the Nativity, the flight into Egypt, and the presentation in the temple. Now, the predella is the small scenes below. It's what rests directly on the altar. One of the things you'll notice about this is how rich it is. The word pageantry comes to mind. And we're going to look at some details, and you'll see there's gold leaf on it. There's intricate patterns. There's just so many things to make it rich and beautiful. And this is a kind of interesting transition, because we know what comes next in art. Gentile wouldn't have, but we know what comes next. And so you see things that are, as I say, very traditional, trying to make this very rich. And remember the patron. He's rich. He wants it to be a beautiful work with lots of decoration. There also are things in this that do suggest, there's things that suggest space and things that take away from the illusion of depth. Just looking at it overall, you can see some of those things. You have the Magi approaching the Madonna and Child, who's down in the lower left with the 2 midwives behind her. And then, as you see on the right, there's this whole crowd of people, densely packed, and it doesn't really look like there's enough room for them all. He's trying to show you these people are behind each other, and there's these are the retinue of the Magi. The Magi, or the wise men of the Gospel of St. Matthew, were also known as the 3 kings because of a verse in the Old Testament that was associated with them. And so it was believed that they were kings from the, either from the east or from the different continents of the world. They saw the star in the sky. That's what the Bible tells us. But there are other stories, such as that of Johannes of Hildesheim, enriching the story of the Magi. So they each are observing the heavens, and they see this star, and they come and they meet, and then they travel eventually, to Bethlehem, where they pay homage to the Christ child. But if they're kings, they can't just travel alone or with a couple of servants. They have to have an entourage. And as you can see, they brought lots of people with them. I don't know if you can make it out here, but there's even a monkey there. Yeah. And you can also look at the animals down here. There's a dog in a very natural pose. You've seen dogs do that, where they have their hind legs up and their lower legs down, and the dog's looking up, evidently at the horse. And you've got the 2 horses in the foreground, and they are foreshortened. So, in a way, Gentile is saying, see, I can do foreshortening. which is a bit difficult, perhaps, and it gives you the illusion of depth. And then you get back into the crowd. Now, if you look in the far background, under the arches, you'll see various scenes. I know you can't make them out here, but there's the Magi on a mountaintop observing the heavens. There is the journey of the Magi to Jerusalem and Bethlehem. And then I think there may be the Magi returning. But anyway, there's a whole parade of the Magi who are really in the center of that central arch, and all of their accompanying, entourage court. Okay, so this idea of covering every single surface with figures and landscape and everything else. And then you just see this little teeny bit of the gold sky. It's, of course, gold leaf, as is traditional. It makes it seem almost like a surface pattern. We can say, those people are way, way back in the distance because they're small, but at the same thing, it seems to rise up. And so you have this feeling of a kind of shallow space. But as I said, there are also things such as the foreshortening, and as we'll look at the drapery of the Virgin, that make it appear to have more depth. So there's this kind of pull and shove between decorative elements that enrich the picture and elements that suggest a more illusionistic space. So let's look at this group with the Virgin and Child. Of course, you have these tooled gold halos. And if you want to know why the Magi have halos, because according to Christian legend, they became Christian saints and were eventually martyred. So the saints have these gold halos. And the midwives are there behind Mary. Remember, I think they are from an apocryphal gospel called the Proto-Evangelium, or the Gospel of St. James. And I think we talked about that earlier with Giotto when we talked about the infancy, the birth and infancy of Mary. The midwives come to the birth of Christ, but he has already been miraculously born. And Mary tells them that she's a virgin. And one of the midwives just doesn't believe that. And it says she reaches out with her hand to check it out, essentially. I assume she's going to feel for a hymen. And her hand withers. And Mary tells her to touch the child, and her hand is healed. So then they both believe. You can see, beautiful decoration, kind of exotic, little turban-like structure on the head of the nearest midwife, with all of this beautiful patterning, the beautiful meander pattern of the gold around the hem of her mantle, and she's turned, away from us as the other one turns for us. So we have the feeling they can turn in depth. But look at Mary. Mary is dressed in this beautiful blue garment, and it is modeled in lighter and darker shades of blue with draperies that seem to wrap the body. We don't have that network of gold lines such as Cimabue used, for example. It does seem that she has a real body beneath the mantle. We can see where the arm presses against the cloth and the leg and the knee. It's quite believable. We'll see a detail, and you'll see how modeled the faces and the body of Christ are. Joseph is standing there behind his family, so you have a little kind of holy family there. The ass is a little hidden, almost like he can't see, because there's this magus with the gold disc halo blocking his view. The ox is very interested in the Christ child. And there were a lot of different legends about the ox and the ass. And one of them was the idea that the ox represented the Gentiles who became the church, and the ass was the Jews who rejected Christ. Sometimes that's not what's at play. Sometimes it's they're warming the child with his breath, or they're both very interesting. The ox and ass know their master from a biblical quotation. The Magi, as kings, you can see one of them is about to doff his crown. The other one, the oldest Magus, has already removed it. And indeed, the Christ child is a little baby. He's sort of patting the eldest Magus on his bald pate, like a little baby. Who's kind of fascinated with that. Also, you could see it as, he's touching him, and this is according to Christian belief, the incarnate God. Quite an honor. The middle Magus looks like he's going to take off his crown, so like tipping the hat. But you can see they're all covered with all of these intricate decorations, presumably to represent gold brocade and other rich stuffs. And patterning does have the effect of flattening, unless you're very careful to show the patterns falling into the fold. So it's enriching, but it's also a little bit flattening. And here are some of the details. And you'll notice how the Christ child is modeled in light and dark. You can see there's that terra verde modeling, but he looks like a baby. He's held on his mother's lap, and the eldest Magus comes to kiss his feet, which is a motif that you do see in a lot of adorations of the Magi. You also might notice that his hand, the one that is not touching the Magus, is foreshortened. And, that's a tricky little gesture, and he handles it beautifully. So there are things that say space, and there are things that deny space, as it were, such as the crowd of people rising up. Of course, you've got this individual man who we're seeing him, once again, foreshortened, as his head is tipped up. He's looking at these birds above him. And here you can see the youngest Magus, once again, with all of these pattern and gold leaf that makes the painting even richer. I took this picture in the Uffizi, actually, and of course it doesn't come out very well to show all the details, but I left it in because it shows you the light shining off the gold. And remember, if this is on an altarpiece and there were candles there and they're flickering, that's going to pick up the gold. I'm not going to show you every one of the predella scenes. I'm trying to cut the lectures a little bit. But I did want to show you Gentile da Fabriano's Nativity. And this is the first scene, the one on the left, in the predella. You see on the far left the midwives. They don't have anything to do. The child's already miraculously born. One of them is turned away. One of them is looking. So presumably you have the one who didn't believe and the one who did believe, perhaps. There is a little building here that you have the side of the wall seems to recede into space a little bit. On the far side, Joseph has gone to sleep. He's sort of huddled here behind this kind of spindly tree. The ox and the ass here are both enthralled with this newborn child, and they're paying a lot of attention to it. You'll notice that you have the cave of the Nativity behind Mary, but you also have something else. You have a new kind of nativity. This isn't the first example of it, but it's something that starts in the late 14th, and as we get into the 15th century, this type of nativity that we call the Brigittine nativity is repeated over and over. What does that mean? Well, Saint Bridget of Sweden went to the Holy Land on pilgrimage. And when she went to the various sacred sites, she had visions. And these recorded in a book called The Revelations of Saint Bridget. And one of them was about how the Nativity came to be. She said the Virgin Mary appears to her and shows her the way the Nativity occurred. And there's a slight difference. She's wearing white, for example, in the vision, and here, of course, she's in the traditional blue cloak. But the main point is the miraculous birth. Rather than a painful birth through the birth canal, Mary kneels, and suddenly, Bridget says, I know not by what member. The child that was in the womb is now miraculously on the ground. She comes from the sealed womb. Later on, or it comes from the sealed tomb as they came from the sealed womb. They sometimes say, just as the resurrection, quite this miraculous passing through matter that Christ can do. And he says and the child is there on the ground, naked and shining. And Mary adores the child. So you see here, she's adoring the child lying on the ground, naked and shining. And then she says, be welcome, my Lord and my God. And then eventually she picks up the child and succors him. But when you see that child lying on the ground, it's from this vision that St. Bridget had at Bethlehem in the grotto, the cave of the Nativity. One of the other things about this that's interesting is it's a night scene. It's not the first night scene. There are other night scenes that precede it. I'm thinking of a crucifixion, for example, in the Très Richeuse Ours, which is a manuscript created for the Duc de Berry, created in France by Netherlandish artists called the Limburg brothers, and they have a night crucifixion. So, this is not the first time, but it is not terribly widespread. It's newish, we'll say. And so you have that idea of the light from the Christ child who is shedding the light. You see, that's the light source. He's shedding the light on Mary and the Christ child. And then you have a secondary light, which is up in the upper right corner, which is the Annunciation to the shepherds. And then you see all the stars in the sky. So, he's really trying to give you a more natural light effect